Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to this month's Zeta Tech Talk. I'm José Gaona, President and CEO of Zeta, Gen Z Emerging Technology Action. We're super excited about the conversation today. I think it's really timely as we continue to work on all things tech, that we talk about how we are building the workforce of that digital future. So let's set a little bit of a scene here before we get into the conversation. Over the next 5 years, 12 million Americans will retire, the vast majority of them baby boomers who are on their way out of the job market. And Gen Z will rise to present nearly 30% of the US workforce by 2030. At the same time, our country is facing a historic mismatch, with over 7.6 million jobs remaining unfilled in industries like AI, energy, and broadband. This is really timely considering the fact that there's over 5 million opportunity youth in our country who fit our demographic of Gen Z looking for jobs. At Zeta, we see that as a call to action. We are a generation raised online, and we know the difference between having access and truly being empowered in this digital era. The digital economy is our future, but only if we can help shape it, not just participate in it. Today's discussion is about the future. It's about fair opportunity for all, and it's about two sides of the same coin. Working class Gen Zers preparing for jobs that are automation resilient, some of which may not exist yet, and it's about digital entrepreneurs building innovative brands leading us into the future. Whether you're tuning in from a classroom, a workspace, or your living room, this conversation is for you. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to introduce today's speakers, two leaders at the forefront of economic opportunity and equity for communities. Anna Brickman is a strategist and partnership builder focused on social impact and community-centered innovation. She leads Anna Brickman Consulting and serves as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Black Gravity. Her past work with Black Girl Ventures helped scale support for Black and Brown women founders across the country. And Laura Maristani, founder and CEO of Catch Skills, where she's using AI to turn everyday learning into job-ready skills. With over 20 years experience in philanthropy, policy, and corporate affairs, she's helped shape inclusive innovation strategies from Capitol Hill to communities nationwide. Wow. We're super excited to have both of them with us. Please help me in welcoming Ana and Laura. It's so good to have you both. How are you today?
Hi, so great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Excited about the conversation.
Ditto. Thanks, Jose.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you all. And I think we were just talking about this, but I think this conversation is going to be so relevant because, in all of the work that we do at Zeta, whether it's, engaging on connectivity and broadband, engaging on the energy infrastructure we need to power tomorrow, or AI, we hear this constantly from industries, right? Like we don't have the workforce, or we're going to have shortages, or we don't have the innovative minds. But here we are saying like, well, that's not true. We just got to talk about this a little bit more and make sure we all have a strategy to move us forward, right, with this next generation. And it's, I think, particularly interesting that we have both of you because you are working at the forefront of this space with so many communities across the country and innovators. So really excited to dig into this. I think the first part of the conversation that I want to dive into is this transformation that we've seen from brick and mortar to skills first kind of, digital ventures and opportunity. So, we're witnessing this historic shift from that traditional, brick and mortar economy to a decentralized, kind of digitally driven one where careers can start really from anywhere, right? And be as small as possible from rural America, wherever, as long as folks have the skills and access. So a question to both of you, right, as we dive into this. You both sit at that forefront of this transformation, whether through validating skills or uplifting community-based entrepreneurs. How have you seen the definition of economic opportunity evolve over the last decade or so?
There's a few ways I think that we could answer this. I'm excited to hear what Laura is thinking, but I think in 2020, we saw a huge shift on what it meant to really empower innovative founders. So founders who traditionally weren't getting access to all the resources that founders need. And that was great in a lot of ways. And then cut to today where we're seeing that pendulum swing back and we're actually seeing the stats that we're looking as indicators for things to change, not shift in ways. Black women have access to less VC money than they did in 2020. But what I think did happen and where I do think there's opportunity is there were people across the country who didn't see themselves or didn't identify as entrepreneurs or see it as a viable pathway for them that now do. We've got entrepreneurship booming at HBCUs. We're looking at community colleges. And so I think even if there are really stark stats around where capital is being allocated, there's really, really exciting opportunity around startups that are changing the game that are being founded that might not have been.
Yeah, maybe I'm going to start a little bit more macro, just having seen a lot of the shifts over the last 20 years, working on workforce policy throughout that time and, landing in philanthropy where I was in charge of the easy task of figuring out how to bridge divides in America to the solution, which I believe is catch. So a lot of what we've seen is we're building a workforce and we have a lot of funding and strategies to do that, but often for the wrong type of economy. And by that, I mean, we look a lot at traditional pathways. So when we are looking at a region and we're trying to design, so what is going to be the future of work, often we're starting with incorrect information or delayed information just because of the pace of technology. So think about students that just graduated from college. Many of them, even if they're graduating with engineering degrees, they missed a lot of the instruction around AI. And a lot of what they have to go do now is go supplement that learning. And so I think that a lot of that speed in innovation has caused some of that, but also just incorrect information, communities that were heavily reliant on, organizations or organisms or economies that were not what they should have been building for are seeing a lot of that transition and impact in bigger ways than perhaps in other areas. So during the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of that. And I think now with just the pace of technology, how we're seeing all these additional opportunities to grow and learn, where we're starting to sort of expand our thinking. And I wish we would expand that a little bit more, but it's around how do we think about those pathways, all of the ways in which people are learning, all of the ways in which our economy needs people to learn so that we can, move forward, succeed, create opportunity, create prosperity in our communities. So there's a bit of an aperture there. I think more of the conversation has to focus on how do we change culture? How do we think about valuing that because it is already here? Often we see, right, we have all these different platforms, all these LMS platforms that are teaching folks in all these formats. But how do you make sense of it if you're a small business trying to look for talent in your community? How do you make sense of it if you're an HR manager at a large corporation, someone coming in with 50 certificates, et cetera. So I think we're already at a place where there's an appetite to have more of that conversation. And I think Catch is definitely a part of that solution. So I look forward to talking a little bit more about that.
I think that's a really interesting way to open up the conversation because what we're naming, if it sounds right to frame this way, and feel free to chime in again, either of you, but is we have seen a very massive, worldwide shift in that definition of economic opportunity as AI has come into play, as mass access, the digital era has kind of evolved. Particularly thinking about in that phrase, the fact that Gen Z is online multiple hours a day, right? 99% of them have a smartphone. They are online. I don't want to misquote, but I think something like 4-6 hours a day on average, consuming short form video content, as we talk about often at Zeta. And that has an impact on both the digital economy for consumers, but then also the creation space. When you think about, that particular demographic of young folks spending, accounting for 50% plus of all online purchases, like there is an evolution. There is a huge evolution. It's only just beginning, as that generation is still only halfway into adulthood. So it sounds like we're saying, yes, like there has been a massive shift and we are still catching up. And that's where players like Catch Skills come in, right? To figure out, you have all these certifications in AI. What does that mean, right? Like, what's the application of that? Whether you're a worker, a small business, or a big player, how are you working through this landscape, this very, very kind of Wild West landscape? Is that more or less what I'm understanding from folks? Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a big part of it. I think part of it, to your point, the younger generations, they're already there mentally. So for them, it's natural where we are as an economy. What isn't is that the world of work still is valuing an older pathway, an alternative, like another
Mm-hmm.
pathway. And so that's where we're seeing a little bit of the disconnect. You're seeing a lot of folks graduating. We're seeing difficulty finding jobs, right? How are they navigating that landscape becoming increasingly complex? The younger folks are already understand where we are. So I think it's more how we think about it from a broader macroeconomic standpoint.
Oh,
Is the system ready for that?
Yeah. Oh, I love that you said that, because actually the next question I think ties into that really, really well, which is, Gen Z maybe is at kind of the front of that adoption space in understanding these tools, or just exposure and comfort with some of these tools that are coming out. I know I see a lot of Gen Z who are like, yeah, I've started to integrate this into my everyday work, or the Gmail like polish feature for emails, like, just it's a part of my routine now, or, calendar tools, etc. I love using, some of these tools for kind of like daily tasks at home, structured tasks, whatever it is, right? There's an adoption advance, but where there's that disconnect that you're naming with industries, I think Gen Z is still asking themselves that question: how do they open up more opportunities in this workspace with these skills, right? As maybe industry is a little slower to accommodate these skills. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts there, either of you, but Laura, I think I'm looking at you maybe, to get your thoughts there on what role Gen Z plays as maybe the early adopters in working with our industry folks and companies to bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we're trying to do with Catch is really take in the fact that people are already learning in all of these ways. Whether you're 45 or you're, 20, you are seeking information to stay competitive in all of these ways. Whether it's listening to this podcast, it's watching a YouTube video to figure out how to use Canva more effectively. We're doing it. The thing is that, then how do we translate that so that we can add value when we show up at work, so that we can get the next career boost, so that we can get the next job? And so I think Gen Z can play an enormous role in that, because they are the generation that has already from the beginning been growing in this way. I often talk about my younger kids. They're learning on YouTube at school. They're learning, watching videos, right? They're already a part of that economy, but then the only way that we're sort of valuing what they learn is through tests and, graduations and certificates and things like that. We need to be able to push the system so that we can aggregate all of these different things that we're doing and use that. And so how wonderful if a large corporation would be able to look at all of the things that their people are doing and value them, whether it's volunteering on a Saturday, whether it's that they went home and they watched a video, or it's that they went to the training that the office asked them to go to. That's the way that we're going to maximize efficiency. We're going to be able to build better teams. We're going to be able to deliver more efficiently if we are able to actually map the stacks of superpowers in an organization, in our communities. Imagine the potential if you're able to map the skills of an entire region, of an entire state, and be able to say, you know what, X corporation, you should move there because the majority of the people there, they may not have degrees, but guess what? They have the skills, the exact skills you need to be able to scale. We can do that. And I think younger generations that, again, are already learning in these ways can lead the way.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds so exciting when we put it in that frame of mind. And it sounds easy, right? When we talk about like that intergenerational kind of collaboration and strategizing. I think one of the areas where we have seen Gen Z particularly take a strong lead, and I think, are being well received now is in social media marketing. I think we all have kind of our favorite, maybe, industry leading TikTok accounts or social media accounts where there is a disruption in the way that we are seeing the marketing of these brands to create this like strong sense of loyalty or community building digitally. And I think in many of those instances, as we've seen with like some political campaigns, some really, popular corporate pages, it is the Gen Z folks who are leading the charge in kind of this definition of raw, authentic marketing or raw, authentic kind of like identity building for brands. I think that's one of the areas where we're seeing that early acceptance or like just a strong reception to Gen Z, bringing that skill set because like the marketing space needs to be so quick to adjust. But you make a strong argument for us really looking at the skills, whether it's like regional or generational, that we all bring to the table and trying to work together and collaboratively and making sure that we are maximizing them, which I think is super exciting. I want to actually dive into that a little bit more and talk about skills and access, right? From both of you, I'm curious to know, what would you say are the critical skills in this digital economy and the digital era that we're moving into, not just technical like coding, but some of those softer skills in this, evolving job market that are a must for Gen Z to thrive?
I think like you kind of hit the nail on the head with it's soft skills. People like I think what we've seen in some of our next gen founders is they're really, I mean, they're honed in and laser focused on the business they're building and have this idea around like, oh, I can't ask for help or I can't ask for this until I'm at X level. And the reality is your business is going to be its best version of itself when you can figure out how to articulate and ask for the things you need when you need them. So at inception, you should be figuring out who's going to be the best at like even running this idea by someone who's going to help me figure out how to be the best at pitching. Like who can I go to and how do I get to them and how do I convey the things I need to them and why they should help me early on and just building that network because that's what's going to get you the farthest. And so I think understanding that even though I've got all these digital resources around me and they're so native and intuitive to me, I still need people. And so what that looks like and you only get really good at that by practicing it. So just getting out in the spaces of doing that. And then I think the other side of that is keeping your business personal. So some of the next gen founders we're seeing where AI is so unbelievably, agentic AI is so unbelievably embedded into their business, you still need the human touch, especially if it's a people facing company. So figuring out that balance of how do you let this thing run and do what it's doing really well while still being like the person behind it. So kind of the two still just like bottom line soft skills, but just keeping that at the forefront.
Let's say that again, because I think it's so important that like folks, regardless of how old you are, understand the human touch is never going away. Like it's so important, and I'm so like happy to hear you like emphasize that.
Absolutely. To be able to, so when we think about skills, we often have some general, I guess, thoughts in our minds about what those are. Most of us will say critical thinking, attention to detail, time management, and things like that. But to perform in jobs, you actually need a combination of things. And so the way we track it at Catch is in three categories. We have what we call skills, which would be essential skills, like Anna was just talking about, critical thinking, your attention to detail, those sorts of things. But then we also track knowledges and technical skills. And so knowledges would be, what kind of information are you learning? How do you stay competitive? And technical would be what you're talking about, Jose, which would be more of obviously the tech. Are you really good at ChatGPT? So I'd say that it's always a combination of all of those that will help you succeed, that will help you stand out. And the answer to your question from me would be that the most important one is a desire for continuous growth. So to always want to continue to learn and grow. Times will change, economies will change, the people around you will change, right? We don't live in a world like perhaps some of our parents where they were able to have jobs for, 20, 30 years. The longest I think I've stayed in a job has been probably 5 years. And so it's a radically different way of thinking about how you navigate the career space, how you navigate life. And it continues to require that spirit of learning. So that to me is number one. And then from there, you can sort of disaggregate what does that mean? Because then that could mean, well, during this moment, if I'm, 50 years old, I should probably be looking at how do I get better at asking questions so that I could use ChatGPT more effectively. If I'm younger, then maybe I do want to go. Anna had excellent advice. Like, you need people, you need mentors, you need people around you, because right now you have to kind of learn some of the norms of the world of work. How do you kind of come into those cultures of work, which you haven't been a part of because you've been in school? And so it shifts throughout life, and career life. But I'd say, going back to it, like, just to reiterate, that spirit of learning is top of the list.
I'm mentally like trying to keep tab of all the things that you all are both saying that I'm like, ooh, I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about that. But you bring up such an excellent point, Laura, which is there is something to be learned regardless of where you are, right? Like in your career space as well. And there's a really important experience that is particularly for Gen Z, came at a really pivotal moment of like development, which was the pandemic, right? If you're on the older side of that Gen Z demographic, you experienced the pandemic during college or in your early career, like 1 or 2 years, right? Like professional journey. If you're younger Gen Z, it was high school, right? Or even middle school. And so those are really formative times. In the communities that I have kind of been a part of in the Gen Z space, particularly those that are now entering the job market, it comes up a lot, right? Like, oh, I didn't learn how to do that, right? I didn't learn the office, like, water cooler culture before, like, everything changed, right? And I think that's something that, like, now we are starting to understand a little bit better. Like, what are those things where we need to fill in some of those, like, gaps, work, team collaboration, knowledge, things that we have to be intentional about going back to with that generation specifically. But we also touch on, like, everyone having to adjust, regardless, again, of generation, adjust to this very massive evolution in our economy, right? With AI and some of these digital factors that come into play. I think that's interesting in part when we think about Gen Z, because they are the most college-educated generation to date. It's somewhere in the ballpark of like 52% of them are college educated, or will be college educated, as kind of some of the younger ones continue to go through high school now. So they're very highly educated individuals, but there's something, a question here around how far does that take you? And then, how are the skills that folks like you, Laura, are identifying need to supplement this education as things continue to evolve so much. I am of the mind, and at Zeta, we think often about that two sides of the same coin, our college educated folks, but also our working folks, right? Like the backbone of our economy, our working class folks, and the opportunities that they're looking for as well to make sure that they're a part of a strong middle class. I have a question in here for the both of you, which is, how are we maybe putting some myths to rest or starting to find value for non-traditional higher ed journeys or like digital skill building journeys that help both our entrepreneurs but also our working class folks in this new economy?
I'm going to jump in because I want to pass it to Anna after I say this part, which is, I love the question, Jose. Here's the deal. The economy that we're in actually is full of enormous opportunity if you start to think about all of the different pathways. So not only to gaining skills, but what you do with them. I'm an example of that, and I love Anna to jump in and talk about the many examples she likely works with. But I had a job 3 years ago at a tech company that collapsed in the middle of the night. And at that moment, really sitting back and looking inward and saying, you know what, I know how to do some things really well, and I'm kind of tired of using them to go back, build other people's dreams. I'm going to go build my own. And I think this generation needs to kind of think of themselves in that way more, because there is a lot of opportunity when you think about, I think I see it in my mind as tentacles, right? So one, yes, it's the traditional pathway. You go to school, you get a job, and maybe you're there some years and then you grow, etc. That's a great path. But maybe your path is entrepreneurship, or maybe your path is not with a major corporation, but in your local community, or it's with a nonprofit organization, or it's with government. There are a lot of different pathways out there right now. And so I would encourage, a lot of the folks listening to consider that perhaps the advice that you're being given, because many of us are taught that there is only one path, is not right. And that, we can find opportunity, especially during this difficult time. I see students graduating. Look at this. I'll just give you an example. Maybe it's really tough right now to get people to answer back your job application. Go find 3 or 4 clients that'll pay you $1,000 a month each. And I assure you that you're going to be able to make a living between now and when you get the dream job while you're building skills. So there is a lot of different ways to think about that. And I'd love to, pass it to Anna, because I know she's doing great work in that space.
Yeah, no, I mean, I also want to say that by the time you're making the 3K month over month and have these clients, you might also figure out that that is your dream job, and figure out how to monetize it further. And so yes, double clicking on everything Laura you just said. I think that also an exciting or interesting stat for me, at least, that 1.4 Gen Z is 1.4% more likely, or times more likely than millennials, to go into work that's impact over profit, which I feel like just double clicks on the not just traditional path around what you graduate or even don't graduate and are told to do or told what success looks like. And I think what I see that's really exciting is all these, specifically women, but people coming to the forefront are getting some publicity who aren't what you assume traditional entrepreneurship is. And so it's just been democratized in this whole new way of what that looks like. And I think, again, because we've got this digital world at our fingertips, what entrepreneurship looks like can look different. And I kind of feel like this conversation has started to pop up, and hopefully we'll get to talk about it more later. But it doesn't even necessarily mean that you quit whatever job you currently have, invest all this money into something, and then bank on it. It can look like gig work. It can look like doing something on the side and picking up and putting it down. But in doing those things, you're gaining all these skills that will eventually help you land wherever it is. And it's just data. It's data to collective. Oh, I'm really enjoying this. Oh, I don't like this so much. Oh, I'm really good at this, not so good at this. And there's not the confinement of you have to do one thing 40 hours a week. And that's the thing for the next, like Laura said, 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. I love that we're touching on that, because I think Gen Z is very, very forward thinking and finding the things that they like to do, right? I think there is that general perception that they go out, they try things, they try to get a sense of like what is fulfilling, and I think that's a product of how they grew up, right? In conditions where there has been a lot of perceived instability in industries that have kind of been defined and then redefined and then defined again. Bringing that emphasis back to like, well, what do I like to do, right? And I think that'll continue. And I think this is also leading us into the perfect next part of our conversation, specifically diving into entrepreneurship and the logistics of trying to like enter this entrepreneurial space for Gen Z. I know that in some ways, and I can attest to this as someone that has been, really, really thankful to have a wonderful team, building an organization over the last year. The digital tools that we have now facilitate a lot of this work, which is phenomenal. I can't imagine trying to build a business, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, without all of the digital tools we have now. How are you all seeing, Anna, interested to get your take here, how are you seeing these digital tools facilitate this journey for new entrepreneurs?
It's been really, really exciting. I think I've gotten to witness and work alongside and support companies that probably wouldn't have existed if they couldn't utilize AI the way that they have. I can shout out two. So one is Clean, CLYN. And Diane has basically started, I mean, it's national now, but basically working with VRBO and Airbnb hosts to get cleaners automatically connected with them in between guest stays. And it's entirely AI powered. It's amazing. And again, that is just a new recent development that's only really made possible by AI, as well as a company called WeNight, and the co-founders there have figured out a way to digitally connect and match HBCU students, also entirely powered by AI. But it's also, I guess the point is, not only are those companies AI powered and AI is built into the integration of these companies, but they're also running these companies at the scale and the speed they are because they're using AI literally as employees. Like it's their marketing teams, it's their comms teams. And it's just so powerful because they're running these companies really well with such little manpower, on top of the fact that specifically minority founders are used to bootstrapping and they're still bootstrapping. So it might still be in lots of cases where there's not access to capital, but they have from their viewpoint and vantage point, free employee and free support that they would have otherwise had to pay for and wouldn't be nearly where they are right now. So those like two examples are really exciting for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Laura, anything to add there?
I mean, I think, yes, I have two businesses. So I definitely use a lot of the tools. I'd say, though, still, yes, it can probably limit some of your costs on payroll. And yet it also creates opportunity, right? So it means you have to get you can get as a business owner a little bit more, I guess selective. It makes you a little bit more selective on the kind of talent that you bring in, because you want to make sure that it's talent that is staying on top of a lot of what is changing and is able to kind of help manage and leverage and amplify and really use it to scale. I think for me and individually, sometimes that's where I'm like, I'm in DC, right? I've been here for a long time, but I'm a lifelong learner. And so I've completely dove in. I mean, I'm building an AI platform. Of course, I have a full team of developers, all of them on board also for free. So my team is all building the dream with me. But it helps, again, that we have a lot of those tools. And where they really have helped, I think, just kind of like throwing it to Anna, but those applications for venture capital can take a really long time, and they ask very complicated questions. And so I think AI has been super helpful there. I think for marketing, it's super helpful as well, but I think less so for developing the ideas. You still need humans for that. You need our passion, our desire, our drive, that can only come from a human. And so I think like even if you're the best person at prompting ChatGPT to give you ideas on what businesses to launch, if you don't feel that inside of you, if you don't have that seed, it's there's nothing you can put into an AI agent to tell you what to do. And so I just kind of like reiterate that, because I know there's a lot of fear out there about the transitions, and AI is not going to go and build new businesses, people. Like people are going to build new businesses.
People equipped with AI, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I just want to double down on like the VC transition point and access to VC dollars is no VC is going to write you a check if you are just this like AI machine presenting to them. They want drive, they want a person to deliver the message, they want someone who like they're having fun with a dinner. Like it's got to be that personal touch as well, and they've got to see it in your eyes that you're as hungry and gonna and want the success as badly as they want the return. And so while it might get you in the front door, that's really just the start of it. And I think that's applicable to much more than raising venture.
Yeah. What's kind of like standing out here in this conversation to me is this notion that, if you want to build something today, it is really valuable to have these tools, right, in your arsenal. What is still at the core of like that entrepreneurial path is a nugget of a unique idea, a nugget of like passion for the project itself that you're defining. And I do think that there is this notion that like folks on social media sometimes sell, where they're like, oh, you can start a business, like go into ChatGPT, get an idea, like automate this, automate that, and you just sit back and relax and cash like the checks. And you don't have to think about anything or conceptualize anything. I think that recipe is not something that makes a good dish, because at the end of the day, you don't have that passion, you don't have that personal touch that is still required when you're building something, right? And I think that's something that's important to hold really close for folks that are thinking about entrepreneurship in the digital era. That to me raises a question, which I'll pose to both of you, which is how do we ensure that those financing opportunities, those VC opportunities for startups, are not passing folks by who maybe don't have the skill set right now to leverage these digital tools in their startups?
I don't have an optimistic answer for that. I think like I struggle because I think before we saw this huge wave, I mean, one before Gen Z was even old enough to really be running successful companies the way they are when we were still in school. It was so access to VC specifically, if we're just going to talk venture, is so low and so homogenous in who they were funding, and we haven't seen that change. So I guess my hope is that in this learning and with how diverse Gen Z is and how diverse their ideas and skill sets are and have the potential to be, it will democratize it a bit. I also think kind of specifically answer your question around like Gen Z participants who don't necessarily have these skill sets, working with a company who can and learning under these founders who've got it and are figuring it out. And I think like just to shout out Laura's previous point around skills, I think like the most important thing that anyone needs right now, and if you're going to succeed, like I feel like 9.9% of 10 people have this, is this commitment to curiosity and learning. Like you've got to be able to stay on your toes. You've got to really have this want to succeed and learn. And that can't go away. And I do feel like if that exists in you, then there's more of a chance. But yeah, I don't have a super optimistic answer, unfortunately.
I think one of the just getting kind of combining the question with the previous question around tools, your automatic go-to when thinking about launching a business doesn't necessarily have to be investment. And I learned this, I guess, going on the journey, because for me I knew I was building something complex. Patch is not an easy widget. It has a lot of formula behind it, a lot of thinking. And then it also has to kind of deal with the cultural environment. Like, do we value this? and the movements around it. And so I think AI has enabled us to kind of ride that space longer, build for longer, do the work, bring customers in without having to necessarily rely on investment. It would have been lovely to have investment from the beginning, but I think that it definitely has pushed us to continue in a way that perhaps other founders would not have been able to do when building something like Catch maybe 3-4 years ago. And so I think AI in it and the advancements there are going to enable more companies to be able to launch and do perhaps more work and have more runway before they have to do that. Also, especially if you're younger, and you have other opportunities, or you have a side job and you're trying to kind of like make it work for your company, you can do that. There are for me, I'm older, right? So for me, I have kids, I have parents that live in the house with us, right? Like it's a whole other complicated kind of environment that we're in. But I had another business that I was also standing up, which increasingly I'm like, they're both the same. Why did I have two different structures? One of them is making money. And then the other one, on paper kind of seems like it isn't, but they're the same thing, right? And so there are different ways of approaching how you think about launching a business. Venture is one of them. Angels, other folks in your community, even GoFundMe. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of think through how do you sustain yourself if you really have that passion. And then I'll go back to Anna also, like it will be great too if you seek opportunities to learn. So I was privileged enough to make it into Techstars Founder Catalyst back in the fall. And that was really great because I got without equity to really learn what the ecosystem is like, how do you set up businesses? How do you think about the process without having to commit yet to having investors on board. And I thought that was great. It helped me make the decision that, moving forward at some point, I do want to go seek around, but again, learn so that you make less mistakes, so that you can do it faster, and then lean on AI as much as you can because it's helping to lower the costs than the risk of launching a business.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that we're talking about, some of the barriers that still exist. I think, it is true that we need to make sure folks are empowered with as many skills, digital skills as possible, like in the entrepreneurial space, because it is becoming very critical. I think there's also the policy brain. My policy brain is like wanting to come up and it's kind of like speaking in my ear, but to talk about the federal investments, right? There's so much conversation happening in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill about workforce development investments. The Congress is taking a look at the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act reauthorization this cycle, and we're going to see historic investments across various industries. I know across multiple industries that touch tech. I always hear in these rooms of folks that are more established, right? Like the concern around these shortages, the concern around like American innovation and wanting to make sure that we're staying competitive at that global level. There is this desire for federal support, for like a public-private partnership, right? And for us to see, federal investments in programming, in education, in tools. I want to know, like in your work, for the both of you, where have you seen success or value in public investment in tools for folks starting to build new opportunities, or for workers, whether you're entrepreneurs or workers trying to adjust? Have you seen these tools in play? Have you seen their successes? Either of you?
Well, I come from that world. I used to lead Ed and Workforce on Capitol Hill for a while, and it's also why I know Catch. It's the right time for Catch.
Yeah.
But I think there are a number of things. One is the increased attention to paid on the job training. So whether that's apprenticeship or other ways where people can get paid to learn and to work, there has been an increasing push to channel funds across the aisle into apprenticeship and those programs. And I think that that's super important because it starts also to create a world where employers can value those multiple pathways. And it's coming right from the federal government, from state governments, et cetera. There has also been an increase in thinking through expansion of certain benefits, like, for example, the Pell Grants and how those could be used to be able to enable folks to learn in different formats. So I think, at least from the learning standpoint, those are good initiatives that are going to help kind of create an environment where people have access to funds that help them grow and learn in all the ways and create diversified pathways. I think, obviously in opportunity, looking at the state level and some states too that have been able to develop a lot of new programs to support entrepreneurship, the additional focus on small business development has also been helpful. And I think too, like with technology and some of these other initiatives, we've also seen much more collaborative efforts on the ground. So more organizations that have been able to, work with government funds and other actors to be able to kind of create opportunities for entrepreneurs to grow and learn, et cetera, and incubators, accelerators, all of those things. So I think overall, I have seen at least that there has been a lot more investment in all of those pathways, in educating communities on the opportunity of it, in educating communities on the opportunity of technology. That has also, at least, also been something that I have seen in community, and continuing to educate across sectors. There's also been a lot of investment on that. So I think overall in this particular space, in skills and learning, that the developments and have been seem to be tracking in the right direction.
That is great to hear. I think I'll quickly add that sitting on the other side of it, I've not really seen, I mean, in some small cases, but I haven't seen it large, like government funding being unlocked as non-dilutive capital for founders. I know that exists, and I've seen it rarely, but I think there's a real opportunity to like shed some light on those pathways. Maybe that's an AI question that can help answer. But I do know that there's a huge opportunity for that to become clear. What I have seen is federal funding being driven into nonprofits who, like Laura touched on, provide like fellowships and incubation, and also some non-dilutive capital that way. But I think really some teachings around direct access to that funding, I've seen is a real need and an opportunity to communicate those opportunities further.
That was my next question, would either of you identify any additional partnerships or extended, resource in public-private collaboration to unlock more economic opportunity at scale? I mean, I think about, some of our historic legislation of the last few years, like the Inflation Reduction Act, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which unlocked, billions and billions of dollars for folks all over the country. And there's still a lot of funding out there, but there is, and I remember this from some of that work a few years ago on the policy side, there's always that question of like, who's teaching these folks how to jump through the hoops to pull funding? Laura, I might actually kind of like pass it back to you, because I'm curious to know, like in your work, right? Is there anything that you kind of have on your wish list that if you could, wave a wand and say like, this should be more, have more attention put on it, or there should be more resource expansion here to help facilitate, fund allocation for these communities? I'm curious to get your take, given your background in workforce development.
Yeah, no, and I actually went through, the COVID years and a lot of that funding surge, working in community with a technology startup. What I saw with some of those funds, so one of the good things, I guess, about the response to COVID was that some of the requirements that had been in place for government contracting and for aligning to some of those funds that were going down to communities. As you recall, during COVID, there were a lot of funds that went directly to cities, and cities had a lot of authority to decide how to use that money. I saw it on the ground. That was really great because mayors were able to make decisions to partner across sectors. It wasn't only, oh, this is going to be a grant program and only nonprofits can apply. Startups too, and others were able to apply. Some of the other things that they did was, do things for nonprofits. And I also was in philanthropy. You are in a nonprofit that they reduced audit requirements for newer companies and newer organizations. And so that I think helped too, because you have a lot of new entrepreneurs with really great ideas. But then again, you have like all of these regulatory barriers for them to be able to access the funding. So the rapid response created an environment where that was a little bit more accessible. If you wanted, at least at the local level, if you wanted to be able to sell to government, I worked with a number of startups and I still do. And many of them were able to build really strong relationships that are still blooming thanks to the ability to come in early at that stage. So I think for that piece, when we think about a lot of the relationship with government and a lot of the policy around it for regulation does kill entrepreneurship, like in some cases, right? And so we have to be really mindful about what it means when we start kind of looking at that, because for us, it costs money. I think like the thing that has cost, one of the most expensive things I had to do was get a lawyer to, it's going to sound dumb, but to make sure that we had all of our terms of agreements and privacy terms and all of those things. So when we're thinking about launching businesses, you're like focused on your mission, and then you're like, oh, do I have the right accounting platform? Do I need to now file taxes in 3 different states? Like those are the things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day, when we should be like, what feature do I build for my customers? Like, are they happy or not? And so I think like from that perspective, those are some of the places where I've seen too that rapid response was helpful. I think obviously a lot more work to do, creating opportunity for entrepreneurs to be able to sell to government where it makes sense, helping folks navigate all of those environments. Now, obviously, looking at states to be able to do more of that as the federal government seeks to transition their approach to rely more on states to make some of those decisions. So there may be more opportunity in that for local entrepreneurs in their states. And I actually would recommend, like, if you think you have a product that could align well to some of the priorities that, listen to what your governors are saying, listen to what your mayors are saying, because you'd be surprised. Even if you think that you have a product that is built for something else, there could be a chance that it connects well to a local priority, and you could connect that there. So I always tell, and anybody in life, because I come from that realm, from policy, I always tell everybody, it doesn't matter in what you think you're building, what you think you're doing. Understanding your political environment should be number one, because it'll tell you what's going to stand in your way. It'll tell you what the opportunity is early, as opposed to those who may not necessarily be tuned in.
Yeah, keep a pulse on policy is what I'm hearing as like really valuable advice for builders, which I think is really true, because we have like such a vast network of local, state, and federal opportunities that will reinforce businesses. But knowing how to take advantage of those opportunities is what you need. Like, you need to know, right? That's super interesting, and certainly, we're really excited to continue to work on, some of these priorities at Zeta around workforce development, because we know that we need to continue to be proactive there. As our populations also get a little smaller every generation, we have to be a lot more intentional about the way that we are meeting these demands, right? As business owners, as entrepreneurs, as builders. I'm going to be mindful of our time here because I do want to try to catch one or two questions from our audience. So I'm going to start to close this out for our conversation. We're going to move into just some general advice questions before opening it up for a couple of audience folks. So, if either of you had to give one piece of advice to a young person trying to decide whether to pursue, you know, general employment as they enter the workforce or build their own opportunity, what piece of advice would you give them in thinking about their future, entering the job market?
I mean, I'd go back at it. I think we have touched on many different, like the fact that it's not just one thing. It's that there's not going to be like some magic solution to tell you that you should follow one path or the other. And that may look in different ways. So if you're early on, go out there and experiment. Don't assume that you know everything because you probably don't. There are things that come with different stages of life, and if you're early in your career, you actually have a little bit more privilege to go out there and spend time learning, building your networks, understanding what each of the paths could potentially mean. So again, that approach to being curious, to learn, to continue to grow yourself, that's going to be, I think, number one for me, as you try to define, what's that first step to be able to launch, what my pathway is going to be.
It's a great piece of advice.
Just quickly to say, no, not a shameless plug, but also in all that learning, don't leave it on the sidelines. Like, capture it. There are platforms for that. It's called Catch.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. I think what both of you are saying is really, really important for folks to take away, and I would ditto that even in my experience, right? As I call myself a geriatric Gen Z, because I'm like as old as you can get, and still be in the Gen Z demographic. But I think that curiosity is important for young folks because things are shifting quickly as well, right? New tools come into play. Certainly our like landscape as a country is shifting quickly a lot all the time. And so that curiosity is important. I think it's something we need to continue to take and harness while also leaning into it sometimes to say like, yeah, this is fascinating. I'm going to lean into that and test it out. So I appreciate what both of you are saying. Any final words from either of you before we open it up to questions?
I'm off mute, so I guess I'll go quickly one last time. But Jose, I feel like we probably have very similar birthdays because I'm also like the cusper of all cuspers, which is a really interesting place to be. But I think the last thing I'll say is we can sit behind a camera and say, do X, Y, and Z. It's not that hard. It still can be really challenging and is hard. And there are tons and tons of challenges and barriers that we didn't address that also are very specific to various demographics. It's an incredibly diverse generation. And so there are incredibly diverse challenges. And so I think one last piece of advice I would say is if you've identified someone either in your immediate world or even online or wherever it is who's doing something that interests you or you think you'd want to do it or feels like they've overcome some of those barriers or challenges, reach out to them. Have them become a friend or mentor or all of the above, because I think that can sometimes, and personally I can say, has been the most useful thing in overcoming any of the challenges around entrepreneurship or any career or professional hurdles.
Yeah, building your community. Oh, that's a good reminder. Particularly in person, because I think that's something we struggle with sometimes to actually, build our kitchen table or build our just like, inner circle of folks that are helping us guide. I certainly could not have like helped our team build Zeta if it weren't for my community of support, mentors, and sounding boards. So, great piece of advice.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Find the community, and maybe it's one, maybe it's multiple. You're gonna find that maybe have different threads of friends that help you with, different parts of your life. And so to be open to that as well, it may not necessarily look like what you think it's going to look like. But that piece is so important. Find a space where you feel like you belong and you can kind of bring in your full self and be able to get not only advice but share it. And I think the last part of that I would say, and then pull your friends with you, bring them along.
Yeah. Oh, I ditto to that too. Um, and on that note, I'm going to call in my friend here from our Zeta team, Lucas. Lucas, do we have any questions from the audience that we can direct to our folks here?
Yeah, we got a couple. I'm going to start with the one on learning resources since you guys have been talking about that a lot. They just asked what specific resources are out there for aspiring entrepreneurs to be able to learn and acquire the skills needed to seek success in the current digital age.
Do either of you want to touch on that, Laura, Anna?
I mean, I can say some of the ones that I use. I think looking at, for aspiring entrepreneurs in particular, looking at the accelerators, there's a number of platforms. Obviously, there are some that are more that people know more than others, but just do simple searches. Even, ask ChatGPT to give you an idea. Take a look at what different folks, what different opportunities exist. Some of them may be out of nonprofit organizations, some of them may be funded, and others not. But I think that's a really good place to go and try to find a lot of those resources. There's also in a lot of those programs, you're able to find resources, even just like the basics, like how do I set up a bank account? Like how do I manage cash flow? Which platform do I use? What bank do I go to? Like those are all decisions that you're gonna have to make. So there's a lot of different local organizations that help with that. I even, reached out at some point. The SBA also has like local centers that provide free advice on that. So just go because there's a lot of free opportunities. They even help you put together your business plans and things like that. So those are some of the ones that I would kind of flag. The other thing is that some companies too may have initiatives where they have like credits and things like that available to you. So don't be afraid if you go on LinkedIn to reach out. Like if you have a friend that works at Google, just be like, "Hi, do you have any credits for the clouds? Like I use my cloud." Like things like that, you'd be surprised. Just don't be afraid to ask. If you don't ask, you'll never know. The worst that could happen is they say no, but a lot of, they're just, if you do ask, you'll be surprised. Like there's probably a road somewhere to someone that can help you.
There's two things that actually come to mind here that I'm happy to chime in with. Number one, I think there's an underrated superpower. If you're Gen Z and you are comfortable enough making phone calls, whenever I have a question and there's like a local, a state, or a federal resource that I know probably has the answer, I will call. In the early days of setting up our organization, the IRS agent or IRS person that I got a hold of became my best friend for a good 2 months. And it was just a wonderful resource at the state commission as well. Same thing, right? Like, and if you're Gen Z, I know there's sometimes a hesitation to get on phone calls, but it is awesome for filtering through what you would otherwise have to filter a lot through online to just call the public good that is there for you. So I would emphasize that for sure.
No, that's a really great point. All really great points and covered, I think, most of the bases, but like back to like just asking for stuff. I know Gusto and Canva really generous with free credits and just like wanting to support entrepreneurs. I will say at the intersection of like founders of color and then like impact companies are kind of like my shtick or where like the space I work in. So I'll just link like Critical Ventures does a great that's great support for aspiring entrepreneurs. The Resolution Project, Macro Ventures, of course, Black Ambition, Digital Undivided, and there really are so many more. And I think a trend I've seen is that before it was very much geared, all these initiatives and all these programs and support systems were really geared towards like existing founders with existing companies, and it's expanding so much more to folks who've got the skills or want to develop the skills and have a great idea. So yeah, I would just continue to search and not feel like you have to get to a certain place before you seek those skills out or seek those opportunities out, I should say.
For sure. Lucas, do you want to hit us with one other one?
Yeah, we got one more. This one's a bit more difficult. How do young people navigate the changing workforce landscape with with further automation of many jobs from AI and advanced robotics?
Yeah, I think we have touched up, we've touched a little bit on some of that. I think that right now in where we are, part of it is trying out all the tools. So there are every day new AI and other technologies and tools that can help you navigate that. That's one. Another one I hear is, LinkedIn is a great platform, but sometimes it can be hard to kind of parse through some of the questions, like how do I put my resume together? What are my skills? Platforms like Catch can help you determine that. But I think getting better at telling your story is also going to be super important. So it's not only how you kind of project it on paper, you really have to get better at thinking of yourself as a brand, especially in this competitive labor market. A lot of employers are going to be looking at your whole self, which I think a lot of us have been wanting to see for a while now. But what does that mean when you have to go out into the world of work and perhaps promote yourself with little experience or at mid-career? How do you tell that story more effectively? Invest in doing that, and beyond what we have said here, obviously growing yourself and finding the right opportunities. Also, don't let the job description keep you away from applying, because I think that always, some person over there wants this dream thing. That's not usually the case. In many cases, they're not describing well what they actually need. So don't let that be the deterrent that keeps you away from a job. Apply anyway, and then try to figure out if you have anybody that you know there. Anna just mentioned some stuff when she was talking, and immediately I was like, I need to talk to Anna because I reached out to that venture capital firm and they didn't respond, right? So for me, it's like, I need a friend there, Anna. Help me out. And so do that. Like, again, ask. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. And I think like relationships are the currency of our kingdom. So just to like that exact point, like it is, if I think to answer this question specifically, is have a real understanding of how AI is going to impact your work. And so I think we can go from being like, it's taking every job to I'm untouchable. And like, no, it's actually somewhere in between. So if you're working in customer service, if you are in retail, like understanding that, okay, like I am more susceptible than maybe someone else. What are the pivots I can make that are right in front of me that will still be around? And is it entrepreneurship? And really, yeah, thinking about talking to the folks who might be your manager, your manager's manager about your concerns. And again, that to Laura's point, like makes you develop yourself into a brand, makes you come top of mind when they're thinking about restructuring. And so I think the like very, very straightforward answer would be thinking about how things will likely realistically change and what you can do to ensure your own protection.
Yeah. I think those are both really excellent points. And when I hear this question, I think about three profiles of individuals. I think about, the working class person who's not going to college and doesn't need to go to college. I think about the person who maybe has a degree, an advanced degree, and it's in the humanities. And I think about folks that are, our STEM folks, right? Engineers. And I think AI is touching all work, right? I think these advances in technology are touching all work, but there's different things that you should be on the lookout and different strategies that you can implement depending on where you are in that mix of profiles. I'm hearing within our working like trades folks and working class folks working to build up these industries the notion of reskilling a lot, right? I'm hearing, the need for us to invest in reskilling and look at the way that we're taking, folks that used to work on coal plants and figure out how do they work on nuclear plants. And, there's a lot of opportunity in that regard. How do they build data centers? How are we looking at, plugging them into places that are forward-looking? In the humanities space, I think it is about casting these wide nets of application and skill building so you are resilient as a brand. And then for our folks in STEM, I think it's about learning the integration that's happening while recognizing that you need to apply whatever it is that your STEM space is taking in from these advanced tools, but you're still needed. This is a conversation I've had with folks who are doctors or nurses, right? Where they say, like, I'm not necessarily worried about fully being replaced by AI, because at the end of the day, you want a physician, you want a nurse, you want a person speaking to you in your health experience, your medical experience. And so I think there's different profiles that we can speak to, but I want to thank you all again for making the time, because this has been an amazing conversation. I think there's a lot of follow-up here that we can continue to explore, as we look to speak to the digital era, opportunities for builders, entrepreneurs, but also opportunities for our working class folks and the folks that are going to be building the digital era quite literally in the United States. This has been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful tech talk, and I just want to say thank you, Laura, thank you, Ana, for making the time to connect with us today. Super excited for next month's conversation, which is going to be on energy, particularly nuclear's role in building our energy future in the United States as technology continues to increase our energy consumption. But just want to say thank you again for making the time, and thank you everybody for joining us in this awesome conversation. See you all next month.